impacted, and as I said, people's failure to see the lights flashing on the dashboard of that company when there was clearly lots of warnings of problems within the organisation.
Could I just very briefly, Gary, I drafted the amendment, and I'm certainly not a lawyer. We've followed the evidence, and all my amendments have followed the evidence. And with James Murdoch, for example, given the conflicting accounts and the history of what we've been told by witnesses going back 5 years from News International, we simply couldn't make our minds up with any conviction about whether he misled or not. Time possibly may tell if other evidence emerges. But whilst following the evidence, it was important to just get our heads up and look at the bigger picture, because we were told that notwithstanding everything that had happened, all the media revelations, including New York Times, not just The Guardian, our report, the wide publication of evidence such as the Fort Neville email, we were just being told effectively that it was only in late December 2010, as long in the process of that there was an epiphany moment, allegedly, that where they suddenly at the top realised that the one rogue reporter defence was not true. And I drafted astonishing in its literal sense, because I had a head-shaking moment. How could this come to happen?
Jay Jones.
Thank you, Joey Jones from Sky News. Could I ask you, Mr. Whittingdale, obviously you're trying very hard to avoid getting into these party political waters, but surely you must be able to guide us a little. If somebody says that some of these conclusions are partisan or politically motivated, I mean, how would you respond to that? And you've said that you're going to ask the House to vote on the conclusions of the committee. Might the House not be a little confused as to what the overall conclusions of the committee are?
In terms of how members voted and their motives for doing so, that is for them to say, and they're all here present and will undoubtedly do so. What I would say is that the motion that we are tabling in the House will concentrate on the issue of Parliament being misled on specific evidence presented to this committee. That was the main remit for the committee in its latest inquiry, and in large part, indeed almost entirely, that on those specific issues this committee was unanimous. So therefore, whatever additional statements which proved more controversial, which are included in the report, the main findings of the committee, which relate to misleading evidence given to the Select Committee, this committee was wholly agreed. And therefore, when we come to have the debate, I hope that that is the area where all those who contribute to the debate will concentrate. Lucy Manning.
Thank you very much, Lucy Manning from ITV News. Could I maybe ask one MP to explain why they think Rupert Murdoch isn't fit to run a company, and another MP to explain why they think Rupert Murdoch is fit? And for those who are found guilty of misleading Parliament, are you going to be taking them to the parliamentary cells? What's the punishment?
Can I have a volunteer from either side?
Why don't you answer the last one first?
Well, in terms of what the consequences are, to some extent, not for the first time, this committee is exploring uncharted water. We have gone as far as to say that we wish to have this matter drawn to the attention of the House, and it is for the House to decide what consequences follow. But there will be others with more knowledge and experience than me who presumably advise on what potential consequences could be. Now, Damien Collins.
Well, I think just to be clear, when we made the decision yesterday on the report, we were given an amendment with a very set wording. And as you will all know, the description of whether someone is a fit and proper person is a matter that Ofcom considers when deciding whether someone can hold a UK broadcasting licence. It's a very precise definition. I think we took proper out, but it's fit a person. That sounds like the committee is making a judgment based on a legal ruling made by the media regulator in the UK. And that was not something we'd investigated. Now, you may have all sorts of personal opinions about Rupert Murdoch and his company and the way he conducts his affairs, but that was not something as a committee we had taken evidence on, and we were in a position we thought to make a judgment on. It was an opinion presented to the committee to vote on. What we were in a position to do was make a decision about who had misled Parliament, based on their knowledge. That was what we'd investigated, that's what we took evidence on, and that's what we published in substance and we agreed on in unanimity.
And the alternative view? Jim Sheridan.
The reason I support the statement that Rupert Murdoch is not a fit person to run an international organisation, I think we have to go back to the fundamentals, in the sense that News International, News Corp, in my view anyway, acted as if they were above and beyond the law. And to suggest, as some people suggest, there was some sort of glass ceiling that didn't reach Rupert Murdoch or indeed James Murdoch is, in the words of a report, astonishing. To suggest that huge amounts of money was paid out to people without senior executives knowing about it is incredible. So people, and I think the general public, will draw the conclusion that it is astonishing that people at that level running a company didn't know what was happening. So, as I said earlier, Rupert Murdoch was the top of the tree, so therefore he, I believe, should carry the can. And in terms of James Murdoch, if this was in a Scottish court or a Scottish committee, I think the verdict would be not proven.
Can I just say, I want to go further than Damien. To me, quite clearly, Rupert Murdoch is a fit person to run a major international company. He's been running businesses since before I was born. He's run successful businesses. He's employed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. He's made a huge difference to the media industry. We have seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that Rupert Murdoch was aware of any of these things that were going on at News International, at News of the World. If I thought he'd have been aware of what was going on and he deliberately covered it up and maybe committed any crime in doing so, then I would have been happy to say I don't think he's a fit person to run a company. We've seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that was the case. Yes, of course, he's made mistakes. Of course, James Murdoch's made mistakes. Making mistakes, we all make mistakes. I make dozens every day. Hands up anyone here who hasn't made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We all wish we'd done things differently from time to time, and hindsight can be a wonderful thing. But to take that to say that this person is not a fit person to run a major international company when he's been doing that for decades seems to me to be not only way over the top, but also completely ludicrous.
The bottom line is we had no evidence on this. And it seemed to me that even in a report as partisan and down political lines as this one was voted on, no member of the committee could find it in their hearts to say that either James or Rupert Murdoch had misled the committee. Nobody, even in the report as it's published. Therefore, it did appear to us that something negative had to be found to say about Rupert Murdoch, since nobody was going to conclude that either he or his son had misled our committee. And therefore this line about Rupert Murdoch not being a fit person, which echoes Ofcom's fit and proper test, was stuck in on the basis of no evidence presented to the committee whatsoever, and we just could not support it. As I say, even though many, many votes went against my point of view on James Murdoch and on the corporate culture at News Corporation, I would definitely have voted for the report had that language not been placed in it.
Yes, in front row.
David Grossman, BBC Newsnight. You'll be aware of the questioning so far has concentrated a lot on the divisions within the committee. Can I ask Tom Watson, why was it so important to get in that line about Rupert Murdoch being a fit person to run a major international company when the expense has been, or the cost of getting that line in has been, allowing opponents of this process to portray it as along party lines, as political payback or whatever?
I understand your point, David, and there is a judgment you have to make with these reports about whether you go for a weaker report and gain unanimity, or whether you stand up for what you steadfastly believe. And where I came to, and obviously the majority of non-conservative members came to, was that we needed to raise the bar. And for me that was because in the last report in 2009, the truth is we were negligent, we made a mistake. We invited Rebecca Brooks, the chief executive of the company, to give evidence on 3 occasions, and on 3 occasions she rebuffed us. And we decided at the last minute not to compel her to give evidence. And That was because there was huge amounts of pressure placed on the committee. There was an election looming, so there was time pressures, but there were also sort of political pressures, in my view, for us to do that. And I didn't want us to be accused in 12 months' time of ducking our responsibility. And I wanted the committee to be courageous and confident and come to a view about the most powerful media mogul in this country. And it would have been wrong for those News of the World journalists who lost their jobs, and for those victims, and for those people that are actually facing justice, for us not to comment on Rupert Murdoch just because of who he is. We've got an honest disagreement here, you can see that. But I just felt that it was important that as a member of the individual members of the committee and collectively, we spoke out.
Just to add to that, for David, when the game was up in terms of the one rogue reporter, as you'll see from the text here, possibly two rogue journalists, one of whom shouldn't be named because of the criminal proceedings. What we saw from News Corporation, to our mind, and it's relayed in the report, was a clear strategy. We were being invited to blame Tom Crone and Colin Myler. And you'll see from the corporate conclusions, and not just the conclusions regarding Rupert Murdoch, that we simply declined that invitation.
Can I just say, David, that quoting my good friend and colleague Dennis Skinner last week when he made the comment in the chamber about when posh boys are in trouble we sack the servants, I'm almost certain that if we hadn't put that line in there, you and your colleagues would have been asking the question, why is the people at the top of News International not been identified as some sort of blame whatsoever? So I'd just say that, we can't have our cake and eat it.
Mr Chairman, I think it's fair to point out on the 14th of July 2011, the committee was unanimous in a division and a recorded vote to summons both James and Rupert Murdoch. So unlike perhaps 2009-2010 when perhaps you decided to shy away, we weren't. We were absolutely united in wanting to pursue the evidence. We just strongly disagree on where the evidence conclusions came out.
That's true. Yes.
Hi, Ben Fenton from the Financial Times. I'm not a lobby reporter, so I may just be speaking out of ignorance. Was it open to the Conservative members of the committee to publish a dissenting report, or minority report, as the Americans would call it? And if it was, could one of them please explain why they chose not to do it?
Simply on procedural issues. Obviously, any member of the Select Committee could prepare a minority report, but actually, as we have emphasised repeatedly, a very large part of this report was unanimous. Therefore, it was probably more sensible that where there were divisions, it was made clear in votes, which are recorded and appear in the back of the report. But the fact that the large first part of the report was supported by everyone was something which I think all of my colleagues felt was the most important outcome.
Can I also point out, though, that not all Conservative members on the committee agreed with each other on every aspect of the report. So it wasn't that we had a sort of a block Conservative view on these matters. So it wouldn't even have been feasible to have a minority report because amongst the four of us, if you look at the divisions, we voted in different ways on different amendments.
Sorry, I accept that, of course, but is it right in that case to come out and say the report lacks credibility, has lost some of its credibility because of for those reasons?
Well, we voted against the report.
Yeah.
So of course we're going
All
to say
of us
that.
voted against the report.
But if that sentence wasn't in the report, we probably would have all voted in favour of it.
Exactly right.
In the middle, yes.
Yep. Ben Webster from The Times. Could I just ask Adrian Sanders this, and perhaps the chairman as well, if you had voted the other way, then, as the only Lib Dem member who voted on the committee, then it would have been split, which would have meant, correct me if I'm wrong here, that John Whittingdale's casting vote would have come into play and the report would have been rejected. And if that is the case, I just ask Mr. Sanders, you have a lot of responsibility there for your vote, and why did you decide to vote with the Labour members, and did you consult other people in your party?
We all have a collective responsibility as a committee to seek the truth, and from the evidence that was presented, from my experience of the previous committee that looked at hacking, and in particular the evidence that was presented to this one, I took a decision on that. and any one member at the end of the day could be that person holding the balance of power, depending on how other individuals made their mind up. Just happens that it was on one section of this report along party lines. It certainly wasn't on other divisions in other parts. How then the chair would have exercised his casting vote, I have absolutely no idea at all. And I think it would be probably wrong of the chairman to give an opinion, because he can only cast that vote in the circumstances in which it arises and not with hindsight.
Indeed. What I would say is that it is a matter of some regret to me that the committee were not able to produce a unanimous report, particularly when on a large number of the issues the committee was in total agreement. And I'm sorry that, in a sense, the strength of the unanimous conclusions has been diluted by the fact that this press conference and attention outside of it will focus on areas where the committee was unable to agree. Yes.
Jean Whalen with the Wall Street Journal. Can you just clarify which aspects of the report were unanimously supported, and also which individuals could be accused of contempt?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the voting at the back, it becomes apparent. But in terms of the main conclusions, those relating to the individuals' names, specifically Les Hinton, Tom Crone and Colin Myler, those conclusions were agreed unanimously.
Thank you. Andy Bell, 5 News. I'm just wondering what you think the public are supposed to make of this, because we've had months where they've been seeing this reported and the Leveson Inquiry and all the rest of it. This was an opportunity, in a sense, to give a lead and to say what you think, and we've ended up with a committee report which is split down party lines. I know the Conservative MPs will say they disagreed on various aspects, but you've come away in the end with a report which does lack credibility. Is that that must be a matter of great disappointment to you, and presumably to all members of the committee?
Well, in actual fact, as I said earlier, I mean, the main focus of this committee in its most recent inquiry was into the question of whether or not we were misled in the evidence that we were given. It is on that subject we intend to table a motion reporting to Parliament, and it is actually on that issue where there is no division within the committee. So to that extent, this is a unanimous report to Parliament that the committee was misled by named individuals.
Andy, if I could come back on that, you have probably noticed from the individual members of this committee that they are all unique in their strong views and wills. And I happen to think that that is a good thing, but it does mean that sometimes you get split reports, and I have no doubt that you will be able to interpret our report and put both views to the public so that they can form their own view. It's my view they've already formed a view on Rupert Murdoch's company, and that this is yet further. This further shows how power corrupted the institutions of the United Kingdom.
Sorry, just before you do.
I mean, clearly, what is perceived out there is also depends on how you report this press conference. But I just take you back to the question from Gary right at the outset, and if you look at paragraph 163, the bigger picture, and when everyone knew, and you look at the division in the back, the committee, and you look at the implications of that paragraph, the committee was pretty much unanimous because it was 9-1 in favour. And this is the paragraph about astonishment.
Hi, sorry. Keir Simmons from ITV News. Do Conservative members now face a difficult choice in the chamber as to how to vote, and whether that vote will be perceived as supporting the Murdochs? And also, in terms of the report, where it says the whole affair demonstrates huge failings of corporate governance at the company and its parent News Corporation, is that the view of the whole committee, and what would you recommend News Corporation shareholders to do?
Well, the question's already been answered in terms of will we be able to support the motion that comes before the House, because the motion that comes before the House will be about Parliament being misled, and we will all be able to support that motion. So that question doesn't arise. As to the failures of corporate governance, this is actually a great example to show that Damien Collins voted in favour of that. I voted against it. We didn't vote as a bloc. There clearly were failures of corporate governance at News Corporation. There is no doubt about that. The Management and Standards Committee has taken it to task. That's right and proper. But it's not really for members of the Select Committee to be advising News Corporation shareholders on what they do and don't do. That's just wildly outside the remit of our committee. And that's where it comes back to the fact that the fit and proper line, the Rupert Murdoch line, which all the reporting will concentrate on, is what prevented us from being able to agree a report to the House almost unanimously. And yes, of course, that is a huge shame.
Well, just add to that, I mean, as the Chairman said earlier, the purpose of the motion before the House will be to decide whether people are guilty of contempt of Parliament.
Yep.
Now, and we're all agreed on that, and that is the substance of the report. It's what we were investigating. It's the first time it's been done since the 1950s. And we've spent a long time talking about something which isn't even included in the next steps of the report because it is, tangential to it, although obviously a subject of interest.
I would point out that Mr. Colin Myler is the editor of the New York Daily News, and we have just found that he has misled a select committee of Parliament. I would hope that a little bit of attention would be paid to the unanimous findings of the committee where named individuals misled Parliament. And furthermore, to answer the very good question posed by Lucy Manning, which is if somebody comes in front of Parliament and lies to it, what happens next? The fact is, we don't necessarily have the procedures in place, and we will therefore be referring it to Parliament to find out what to do. But serious conclusions have been drawn about people misleading Parliament, on which we're all united. There is a lot in this report on which the committee completely agrees. That's the shame that we weren't able to agree on the report itself because of the line about Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
James Cusick from The Independent. Did any News Corp advisor attempt to contact or influence the outcome of this report? And I know that some members of the committee have been contacted, I think by Fred Michel as one name, but anybody else?
Well, in terms of the evidence which I think Rupert Murdoch presented to the Leveson inquiry, listing contacts between News Corp and this committee, I mean, they named a number of members of the committee, but just those currently on the committee and indeed members of the previous committee. I certainly have spoken to Fred Michel in the past. I've always adopted a policy of an open door, not just in this inquiry, but in all inquiries. But if people wish to come and talk to me about to give their point of view, I will listen to them. But the question about whether or not they attempted to influence, yes, to the extent that they were putting their case, but they didn't do anything which in my view was improper, and equally I heard people who came to see me who had just as strong views in the other direction.
Can I just answer that? I would reiterate exactly what the Chairman said, exactly the same applies to me. I can put my hand on my heart and say nobody has tried to influence what I said in the report. And if anybody knows anything about me, they would know it would be a completely futile exercise to try and influence what I think. I think I'm sufficiently known as being independently minded to be completely, I would be affected by anybody's attempts to try and influence me. And certainly, I can put my hand on my heart and say that absolutely did not happen.
I can back Philip up on that it would be entirely counterproductive to try and brief or influence Philip in terms of changing his opinions in any report. And likewise myself, I don't know Fred Michel. They've not contacted me during this inquiry, and I can't, despite my name being there in Leveson, remember anyone contacting or trying to influence me on a previous inquiry, because that would be particularly stupid, I would think.
Chair, just for the record, can I say that I've never sought nor been invited to meet with any representative from News International.
Yes,
I don't know my colleague.
Jim, I don't think I've been lobbied or received hospitality either.
Yes, front row.
Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. This all looks like a bit of a shambles, Mr. Chairman. Are you? You've ended up with a report that half the committee have voted against. Do you consider that you failed?
No, because I think, as I have said, and indeed most of my colleagues who have spoken have said, that on the main findings of the committee in the area which we were tasked to examine, which was whether or not Parliament had been misled, the committee was unanimous. And I hope, therefore, that that will be what people concentrate on. That may be a vain hope, but I would like to think that people will concentrate on that, and certainly that will be the message that we will be relaying to the House of Commons in the motion.
I just want to say that it was put to Tom in our discussions that if you would leave this line out, that we would be able to support the report. And he decided not to on a point of principle. It is all right for people who have different political views to disagree in a principled fashion on things that are close to their heart and about which they care very much. Tom knew that the consequence would be that the Conservative members would not support the report, and he chose to press the amendment anyway, and he was completely within his rights to do so. It is not a bad thing and not a shambles when people who have genuine disagreements in principle disagree, take a vote and put those disagreements on the record. So he had every right to press his amendment to the vote.
Can I just say that you may focus on negativities and report it in any way you wish to report it, but I think the most important issue that's raised here today is that this committee has shone the light and exposed criminal activity within our established press and media. That had led to the Levison inquiry, which would not have happened had it not been for this committee. So I know it's always a comfort zone to be on the negative side, but I sincerely hope that when you're reporting it, that we are hopefully shone the light on what was criminal activity, and hopefully it will stop.
The report says that Rupert Murdoch's self-portrayal as a hands-off proprietor was, you consider, a misleading account of his involvement and influence with his newspapers. Are you accusing him there of misleading you?
That was my amendment, and you've got the text there. What we found was that on times when it suited witnesses, they forgot, didn't remember, or the top said, well, this was such a small part of my empire that or our empire, that we didn't pay it too much attention. And then we have testimony which is recounted from Rebecca Brooks, that when chief executive, she would speak to Rupert Murdoch every other day. You can draw your own conclusions from that. This is a fruitless plea, of course. This shouldn't be a focus simply on Rupert Murdoch here, because there is a corporate conclusion here about News Corporation and News International. If there was one phrase from the last report that resounded around the world, including Australia, I think the phrase was collective amnesia. If there's one phrase apart from Rupert Murdoch that should possibly echo in the same way in this report, it's one that is used in amendments by me, from me and from Tom Watson, but it was a question that our colleague Adrian Sanders first asked in an evidence session, and that was about willful blindness. And that phrase of willful blindness in respect of the whole corporate conclusions, the failure to follow up very public wrongdoing, not just phone hacking, and discipline the perpetrators. I think that phrase should perhaps receive some focus as well.
Dan Saber.
Hi. Rupert Murdoch did give evidence to the committee, and he is the chairman and chief executive of News Corporation. So I'm slightly I don't quite understand why Conservative members felt that discussion about Rupert Murdoch was somehow ultra-virus to the committee's remit. Perhaps they could explain that. And furthermore, why did they not propose any alternative amendments if they disliked the characterisation of Rupert Murdoch as put in the amendment that was agreed? And in particular, why did they not propose an alternative amendment vis-à-vis the fit person statement?
Answer that. First of all, in terms of, I'll answer the same thing. Why do we not put an alternative? That was an amendment to the report. We were voting to retain the status quo of the report. It was Tom who put forward an amendment. So you don't put forward an amendment to an amendment that hasn't yet been voted on. I mean, that's just I don't really understand your point, to be perfectly honest.
If I can, sorry, if you finish.
I'll go on you if you want to.
No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. So if
No,
fine. We had to decide whether Rupert Murdoch had misled us in what he said to Parliament, and no one has proposed at any point that he misled Parliament. Now there is in the corporate in the next step section where you look at the corporate blame. That was an amendment that I supported in the vote. And there we are critical of the company as a whole in putting too much emphasis on the rigour of internal investigation and the action being taken by the company. And that is a criticism of Rupert and James Murdoch as well as other executives who are named in the report. So I think we certainly have been critical, but both in terms of his role and some of the things that he said. But what no one has proposed is that he misled Parliament.
And that's why nobody said that Rupert Murdoch wasn't a justifiable target for the report. I don't think anybody said that. I think what we just said was we didn't agree with the conclusion that's in the report about Rupert Murdoch.
What conclusion would you reach?
Well, if you look at the divisions at the back, you'll see that we would have agreed the status quo of the report without that particular amendment in it.
There would be no comments on Rupert Murdoch.
So you would say nothing about Rupert Murdoch?
No, because we don't believe, as Damien said, we don't believe he misled the committee. We were looking at, the whole purpose of our inquiry was, did people mislead this committee? In our previous report back in 2009, when our report was published in 2010, we don't believe, I didn't see any evidence from, I'm not sure that anybody did, that Rupert Murdoch misled the committee. We haven't seen any evidence that James Murdoch misled the committee. We've concluded that the three individuals that we've already mentioned did mislead the committee. That's why we didn't agree with the conclusion about Rupert Murdoch. If we'd have thought that Rupert Murdoch had misled the committee, I'm sure we would have all agreed a recommendation to that effect. But there was no evidence there to suggest that.
I'm sure you've all read it. But I mean, it does say, which is the section I voted for. This was not done on the basis of one party voting. At the end of the conclusions and next steps, that the News International, its parent company News Corporation, exhibited willful blindness for which the company's directors, including Rupert Murdoch and James Murdoch, should ultimately be prepared to take responsibility. So, there is comment within the conclusions, and that would have stood even without the additional line that Tom Watson was so keen that we had. That meant, regrettably, we had to divide on the whole report.
Okay. Yep.
Hi there, Harry Cole from the Guido Fawkes blog. Were there any objections from the committee to one of their members putting out their own version of events in a book before today's report was finalised? And what assurance did you seek, Mr. Chairman, to make sure that no privileged information given to the committee was used in Dial M for Murdoch by Mr. Watson, especially given the findings of the report are all but revealed on page 312?
Well, what I would say is that almost all the evidence that was presented to this committee was published on the internet almost the same day or very shortly afterwards. So in terms of privileged information which was not available, actually there is very little that we didn't make public. The only ones we did not make public were where we were specifically asked not to do so. I'm not aware that Tom Watson in his book used any information which was given to the committee, which was not made public, but perhaps he'd like to address
Harry,
that.
yes, thank you. Good to see you again. Firstly, your servers are held abroad, so I'm told I can't sue you for libel. Secondly, all the information in the book comes from either public sources, and where I thought the committee may want to see evidence, I submitted it to the clerks, some of which was used, most of which wasn't used because of the justice issue. But I'd like to put a question to you. Can you tell me why Paul Staines felt the need to destroy his hard drives after he broke the Damien McBride story?
I'm not sure that this press conference is an opportunity for the committee to ask questions of the press. It seems a rather novel concept. I think if I could ask you to pursue that after the press conference. Yes.
Hi, Josh Halliday from The Guardian. You urged News Group in the report to waive legal privilege for the Burton Copeland advice. Why do you think that would be significant, and will you consider revisiting your conclusions if it is significant?
I think it was a triumph for the committee to persuade News Corporation to withdraw privilege for the Harbottle and Lewis report. But possibly we should have also got them to do Burton Copeland after the evidence that Rupert Murdoch gave to Leveson last week, where he was specifically asked about this by Lord Justice Leveson. And he seemed to attack Burton Copeland in his statement where he kind of blamed the executives for the cover-up. And there was a sort of mumbled comment to do with the report. And I think it would be really important that we just can clear things up. If that report in 2006 alleges that there was wrongdoing other than phone hacking, then it shows that there was a consciousness at the company at that time where an executive should have acted. And I think it's too late for us to take a view on that. But I believe it was the unanimous view of the committee that that report should have privilege waived and should be submitted to Leveson.
Almost all the significant documents that we received during the investigation came as a result of privilege being waived. Clive Goodman's letter, Michael Silverleaf's opinion, the notes from Julian Pike's conversations with Colin Myler all came as a result of privilege having been waived. So I think it's certainly a tempting line to go down.
One of the difficulties in coming to conclusions in this report has been that many people out there know far more than we do, and that includes lawyers and claimants in the civil claims, because even though those have been settled, there have been disclosures which are protected by court confidentiality. In the Gordon Taylor case, a limited waiver of legal privilege was given. Some people might speculate that might have had the effect of just dumping Tom Crone and Colin Myler in it. But we also asked for a waiver of privilege to be given in the Max Clifford case. We just wanted everybody to come clean, to tell us exactly what they knew, and they refused to do that. I just want to. I mean, there are other parts of this report apart from Rupert Murdoch. There's a section on the police. The police and CPS failed over a long period of time. Not just Mr. Yates and Keir Starmer, but their predecessors too. But one of the things that we don't cover in the report covers a lot of ground, but I'd make this comment, it's probably of more interest to legal magazines, is that there were a succession of lawyers, Farrer and Company, Burton Copeland, and indeed Michael Silverleaf QC, who continues to represent News Corporation in settling the civil claims, who we know knew that what News International was telling us and the public about the one rogue reporter with defence was untrue. Now, it's come out in our conversations and discussions with Speaker's Council that Parliament is not, although it's referred to as a court, not strictly a court for legal codes, but we have not seen any one of those lawyers resigning on principle when they knew that what we were being told and the general public was being told was not true.
Yes, Louise.
Sorry, just to say that there was much disagreement in the committee about this idea. I don't believe lawyers have to represent their client's best interest within the law, and that is all they have to do. I don't see any occasion for a lawyer to resign for having done his job as he is obliged to do under the law. On the matter of Burton Copeland, I do think, I'm glad that Mr. Halley brought this up, and I do think it's an important one. This was an amendment of Tom's, which I was very pleased to support. He's absolutely quite right, and I'd like to take this opportunity to call on News Corporation's Management and Standards Committee to release Burton Copeland from privilege at once, so that we can have transparency and be quite sure that there is nothing further being concealed. That is absolutely obvious. It should have been done before. He was right to make the amendment, and it received unanimous support from everybody on the committee.
Yes, in the row there. Thank you.
Kate Devlin from the Herald newspaper. 2 questions for Mr. Watson. Now that the words fit and proper are in the report, what do you hope happens now? Do you want Ofcom to look at the evidence presented to the committee? And also you've called for the Scottish Parliament to have an inquiry. Do you think that needs to happen urgently?
Okay, we just sorry.
Yeah, so it's not fit.
Yeah, just to be precise, we use the words "not a fit person." We don't use the "and proper" in the section, just so you get that right. And on the Scottish Parliament part, look, we saw Jack McConnell yesterday admit that he was a target of hacking, and we know that Tommy Sheridan now knows that he was a target of hacking when he was a member of the Scottish Parliament. When we found out similar things had gone on in the Westminster Parliament, we ordered an inquiry. So I would hope that the party leaders in Scotland can come together and organise their own inquiry to find out what the scope of the intrusion into privacy was and what the purpose was.
Thank you. Yep.
Tom Newton-Dunn on The Sun. Question for the chairman. I just wonder if you could guide us on a bit of process in terms of the motion that's going to go before the House. You say in the report and the press release that it'll be just on misleading committee. Can you only put motions before the House that the committee unanimously agrees, or will that come down to a vote as well that may well split on the same lines as it has done so far? And secondly, what is the committee's view? I know that you have no parliamentary guidance on what the penalty for being contempt of Parliament might be, but what would the committee must have some form of view on what you would like to see, perhaps an apology at the bar or something that's been mooted perhaps?
Well, in terms of the motion, my hope is that the committee will be agreed upon it. The reason the motion will focus upon specifically misleading the committee is because that is a matter for the House of Commons. On other matters, select committees produce reports, the government respond within a specified period, and the committees can sometimes request a debate. That would be the normal procedure for a select committee report. But in this instance, we are reporting what we believe to have been a contempt, which is a very different matter, and therefore a debatable motion in the House seemed the appropriate way forward, but it will focus specifically on whether or not contempt has occurred. Now, your question as to if the House of Commons decided that it agreed there had been a contempt, what happens next? I believe there is precedent, although quite a long time ago, for an offender to be called before the bar of the House, to be admonished and have the House's conclusions made clear to them. But to be quite honest, I don't know. I suspect that will be a matter for debate, perhaps by Standards and Privileges, perhaps by the Leader of the House and others. At this stage, we are intending to table the motion, and I've no doubt that I and perhaps the committee will be involved in subsequent discussions about what would happen if it is then passed by the House of Commons.
My personal view is that an offence should be created similar to the offence of contempt of court, contempt of Parliament, but that is just my personal view. And certainly that's not the case at the moment, but I think we need a defined consequence for misleading Parliament.
We could spend hours on that particular debate, so perhaps we shouldn't. Last question then. Yeah.
Jean Whalen with the Wall Street Journal. Is it possible then that your motion will accuse Rupert or James Murdoch of contempt, or only Hinton, Myler and Crone?
It has not concluded that either Rupert or James Murdoch are potentially guilty of contempt. It has made a number of other conclusions about them, but on the specific question of who presented misleading evidence to this committee and therefore to Parliament, we named 3 individuals. Paul?
Clearly, we're sadly after 5 years not finished yet. We've not been able to go further because of the police investigation. There are other things that may emerge which may warrant a re-examination of the evidence. And I just stress here the human cost, and that Glenmore Care was not operating in isolation. Because we have not yet had the Motorman database published from the Information Commissioner, we've not been able to make the links between what Mulcair was doing and what the detectives in Motorman were doing, and compare it with the evidence that we were given. Other private detectives were doing other things at the same time, including mounting surveillance over at least one member of the committee. It's been admitted in the civil cases that computer hacking went on. All the pieces of this jigsaw have yet to be put together. But at the end of the day, the human cost of this, the intrusion into ordinary people's lives, really has to be at the forefront of our thoughts and I would hope your thoughts. This was an organisation with its newspapers that gave moral lectures to the public, but acted, as we now know, immorally and criminally itself, and held itself, therefore, above the law.
Thank you. If we have no more questions, thank you very much.